Jace stepped off the smuggler's path and into a world that should not exist. Dark smoke floated in the air, and strange smells burned his nose. He was on Zarto, for a lawless moon deep in the Orion cluster. It was the kind of place where people disappeared and were never found again. He had come for information about a missing human prisoner, but what he found was something far worse. Loud voices echoed through the underground arena. Aliens from different species filled the seats, watching. A raised stage below, the auction had already begun. A tall insectoid barked bids in multiple languages. One by one, cages were dragged onto the platform. Inside were slaves. Some were strong warriors, others were children. Jace clenched his fists, trying to keep calm. He knew he couldn't save them all, not tonight, but he kept walking, moving deeper, pretending to be just another trader. Then he saw her. She was in the back, locked inside a metal cage no bigger than a storage crate. Her skin was pale lavender, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Thin metal bands were locked around her wrists and ankles, and a heavy collar sat around her neck. She didn't cry, didn't speak, didn't even flinch when someone threw a drink at her. She just looked down, silent, broken. Jace looked at the sign on her cage. It read, "Pleasure Stock, Rare Breed, Obedient." His stomach turned. She wasn't listed as a person, but as property. He leaned closer, pretending to be interested. Then, the girl looked up at him. Her eyes met his, and in a soft, trembling voice, she whispered, "Take me home." Jace froze. He had seen suffering before. He had even helped rescue slaves during past missions. But something about her voice was different, clear, desperate, human. She wasn't begging for freedom. She was asking for something deeper. A place, a feeling, a promise. He looked around. No one had noticed their exchange. The auctioneer was too busy showing off a gladiator. Guards stood at the exits but weren't paying much attention. Jace pulled out a tiny tool from his jacket sleeve, a micro-laser cutter, military grade. He knelt beside her cage and whispered, "I'm going to open this, and then we run. Understand?" The girl nodded slightly, her hands trembling. The lock sparked and clicked open. He opened the cage door, but she didn't move. "Come on," he said, more urgent now. She slowly crawled out, her legs weak, her body shaking. Jace grabbed her arm and pulled her close. Just then, an alarm shrieked from above. A red light flashed across the room. One of the guards had noticed the open cage. Jace didn't wait. He pushed through the crowd. Dragging the girl with him, shouts filled the air, and blasters began to fire. They darted down a side tunnel. Smoke filled the passage as steam pipes burst open. The girl stumbled, but Jace caught her. "I've got you," he whispered. "Don't stop." They reached a service hatch. Jace kicked it open, and they crawled into the ventilation shafts. Crawling in the dark, with heat pressing from all sides, the girl breathed hard but stayed quiet. She knew how to hide. She had done it her whole life, after what felt like hours. They dropped into a storage room. Jace sealed the hatch and locked it from the inside. They were safe. For now, the girl collapsed on the floor, her body weak and dirty. Jace knelt beside her and took off his jacket, wrapping it around her. "What's your name?" he asked, gently. She looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Sorrel," he nodded. "Sorrel, I'm Jace." She looked away, tears forming in her glowing eyes. "Why did you help me?" she asked. Jace didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached up and touched the collar around her neck. "No one deserves to live like that," he said softly, "and no one should be sold like a thing." For the first time, Sorrel let her tears fall. She had never known kindness from a human before. She didn't know what came next, but something inside her told her. Maybe now, she had a chance. Maybe this human really would take her home. Asterix smoke still clung to their skin as Jace helped Sariel limp through the back corridor. Her feet were bare, cut and bruised, but she didn't complain. Every few seconds, the walls shook with heavy footsteps behind them. Security drones hovered in search patterns, scanning the corridors with sharp blue lights. Jace kept low, pressing his back against the wall. One arm around Sariel to keep her upright. Her body was too thin, too light, like she hadn't eaten properly in weeks, but her eyes, glowing softly in the dark, stayed alert, focused, not broken like before. They reached a junction, and Jace paused, unsure which way to go. Then Sariel whispered, "Left passage drops into the vent maze. I used it once to hide from a buyer." He stared at her, surprised, but trusted her instantly. They turned left and found the hatch, small, rusted, and hidden behind a broken pipe. Jace gave it one hard pull, and it screeched open, echoing. "Too loudly, quick," he said, boosting her into the dark metal crawlspace. She pulled herself forward, hands scraping against old bolts. Jace followed, sealing the hatch behind them just as a patrol passed nearby, the humming of the drone. Outside grew distant, then disappeared inside the vent. The heat was suffocating. Their breath echoed as they crawled deeper through the narrow tunnel. Jace's back ached, and his hands burned from the metal. But Sariel kept going like she knew every turn. She whispered directions, her voice steady despite her shaking limbs. "Next fork, we take the lower chute. It'll drop us behind the cargo lifts." He asked, "How do you know this?" She paused, then said quietly, "Because I once tried to escape. But they caught me." Jace's heart tightened at her words, but he didn't stop. They slid down the chute, landing hard on a grated floor below. The noise made Jace flinch, but no alarms followed. They had landed in a maintenance bay, dimly lit, half abandoned. Old crates lined the walls, and the floor was covered in oil stains and dust. Sariel leaned against a crate, breathing heavily, her legs shaking again. Jace knelt beside her, pulling a small bottle of water from his belt pack. She drank it slowly, carefully, like she wasn't sure it was real. Then she looked up at him, her voice soft. "Why are you helping me?" "You don't even know me," Jace looked at her, confused. "Because you're not a thing," he said. "You looked at me like a person and asked me to take you home." She blinked, then lowered her head, her fingers brushing the collar still. Around her neck, suddenly, a mechanical noise echoed above them. Cargo drones starting their shift. Sariel grabbed his arm. "We need to move before they see us on sensors." Jace nodded, helping her up again. They slipped through a broken wall panel and into the lower ship bay, now just one level beneath the surface docks. If they could reach Jace's ship, they'd be safe for now. As they crept through the corridor, Jace kept glancing at Sariel. There was something different about her now. She wasn't just a victim. She had knowledge, awareness, survival instincts. Like someone who had been watching, learning, waiting for the right moment. She stopped in front of a locked security door and touched the control panel with 2 fingers. The screen blinked, then turned green. Unlocking without a sound, Jace stared at her, stunned. "How did you do that?" She looked at him and replied, "I remember codes. They trained us to obey, but I memorized everything else." "Trained you for what?" he asked, but she didn't answer, just kept moving forward. Faster now, Jace followed, questions growing in his mind, but no time to ask them all. Finally, they reached Dock Bay 9, and there it was, Jace's ship. Hidden behind scrap and spare parts, he punched in his passcode, and the ramp dropped open with a hiss. Sariel stumbled aboard, and Jace sealed the ramp behind them. Alarms suddenly rang out in the distance. They had been spotted. But it was too late. The engines roared to life as Jace sprinted to the controls. The ship lifted off, blasting through the docking bay doors. Outside, the stars stretched wide and endless. Sariel collapsed into the co-pilot seat. Her eyes closing, her voice barely a whisper. "We made it." Jace looked at her, a strange mix of relief and fear growing inside him. She wasn't just some slave he rescued. She had secrets, and those secrets were dangerous as the stars moved. Past the ship's windows, he realized something. This wasn't the end of the escape, it was just the beginning. The hum of the ship was soft, almost calming, but Jace couldn't relax. He stood near the medical bay door, watching through the small glass window. Sariel lay on the exam bed, curled up, her hands gripping the jacket he had given her. She hadn't said a word since they escaped the station, only her eyes moved, staring at the ceiling like she was seeing something far away, something that hurt. He stepped inside slowly, setting a small tray beside her some warm broth and clean water. "You need to eat," he said quietly. She didn't move for a few seconds. He thought she hadn't heard him. Then her lips parted, voice thin and distant. "Do humans believe in names?" Jace blinked, surprised by the question. "Yes," he said. "It's the first thing we're given." She nodded slowly. Mine was taken. She sat up with effort. Lifting her hands to the collar around her neck, the metal was burned, scratched, and old like it had been there for years. "They used to call me by a number," she whispered. "Unit 87K. That was my name in the auction system." Jace felt a tightness in his chest. "You said your name was Sorel?" She nodded. "That's what my mother called me." Before they killed her, Jace sat across from her, his voice low, steady. "What happened to you?" She stared at the floor for a long time before answering. "I was born on Varelia, a noble house, bright skies, soft waters. My father was a scholar, my mother a priestess." Her voice was dreamy, almost a calm. "When the war came, our house refused to surrender. They burned it to the ground." Her fingers curled tightly around the edge of the blanket. "I was 7. They took me to a breeding facility, told me I was too rare to kill." She looked up at Jace, her eyes hollow. "They trained me to speak 100 languages, to obey without question, to smile while bleeding." She touched the collar again. "They said it would remind me of what I was made for." Jace felt sick, not just from what she said, but from how calmly she said it. No anger, no tears, only memory. "Did anyone ever try to help you?" he asked. She laughed, one short and cold. "Many tried. They all died." Jace stayed quiet for a while, then asked gently, "But you survived?" She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "I didn't survive," she said. "I just stayed alive." Silence filled the room again. Then she reached into the folds of the jacket and pulled out a small crystal cube. It glowed faintly with a deep blue light. "They made a mistake," she said. Holding it carefully, "One of the owners used me to deliver encrypted data to buyers. I memorized the codes, the paths, the faces. Everything." Jace stared at the cube, his soldier instincts kicking in. "That's a black market encryption shard," he said. "You know what's on it?" Sariel looked at him, her voice firm for the first time. "I don't just know it, tie belt part of it." He stared at her in disbelief. "You were forced to know." She interrupted softly. "I did it myself. I made sure the system had a back door." "A flaw." Jace leaned closer. "Why?" She smiled, just a little. "I wanted to leave behind something they couldn't control." Just then, the ship's alarm beeped a proximity warning. Jace stood quickly and went to the front deck. Sariel followed slowly, her steps unsure. But stronger than before, the screen showed a small scout drone tailing them. Its signal locked on their drive signature. Jace swore under his breath. "They're tracking us already." Sariel touched the screen, her fingers tracing the drone's path. "They'll keep coming," she said. "They won't stop until they get me back." Jace looked at her. "Because of what you know." She shook her head. "Because they hate what I am now. Free." He looked into her glowing eyes, and in that moment, something changed. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. It was a war against chains, against power, against silence, and somehow she had already chosen her side. Asterisk, the silence of deep space was broken by a sound Jace knew too well. The steady, rhythmic ping of a target lock. He slammed his hand on the console, switching the display. The scout drone had sent a signal not just to track them, but to call something bigger, and it was coming fast. Sariel stood beside him. Her body tense, but her eyes calm. She stared at the screen, calculating paths in her mind. Jace could tell, even without words, she wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid of being taken back. "We can't outrun them," Jace muttered, flipping switches, bringing power to the rear shields. Sariel didn't move, didn't blink. "They'll use a disabling net. They want me alive." Her voice was sharp now, cold like steel. Jace looked at her. Surprised by the sudden change, she wasn't the quiet girl in the cage anymore. She was something else, someone who had seen too much and remembered all of it. On the radar, a sleek black vessel appeared silent, curved, like a predator moving through water. No lights, no ID, just deadly purpose. Jace had seen that kind of ship before. During border skirmishes, it belonged to the Syndicate's secret fleet, working for whoever paid the most. "No rules, no mercy. They're jamming the signal," he said. "I can't call for help." Sariel turned, walking toward the weapon panel without a word. She pressed her hand to the access pad, and it opened. Instantly, Jace stared. "That's encrypted." She glanced back at him. "I told you." "I remember everything." He handed her a sidearm. But she didn't take it. Instead, she opened a console and started inputting command codes. The ship's internal lights flickered, then shifted to red. Sariel had activated combat mode. Something Jace didn't even know his ship had. "Where did you learn this?" he asked. "They trained us," she said without looking up, "not just to please, but to protect high-value cargo. I was the cargo Jace, and I learned every command they used outside." The black vessel was charging an EMP blast. They had seconds, maybe less. Jace pulled the ship hard to the right, engines groaning. A low pulse rippled through the space around them. The lights flickered, systems stuttered. But didn't shut down thanks to Sariel. The power rerouted. "Just in time. Nice work," Jace breathed. But Sariel was already moving, eyes locked on the secondary screen. "They're deploying boarding hooks," she said. Her voice didn't tremble not once. Jace readied the manual override, but Sariel did something strange. She sat down at the co-pilot station and whispered something into the mic. The ship responded not just with sounds, but movement. It twisted, shifted its thrusters, then flipped backward. A move no ordinary ship could perform without custom code. He looked at her, stunned. "You're not just remembering, are you? You're controlling it." Sariel didn't answer, but her eyes flashed brighter than before. "This ship wants to be free too," she said softly. The Syndicate ship finally closed the gap. Locking its grapplers onto the hull, a loud metallic thud shook the floor. They were being boarded. Jace raised his weapon, ready to defend the cockpit. But Sariel touched his hand. "Let me try first," she said. No one knows their tech better than I do." Jace hesitated, then stepped back. She pressed her palm to the console one more time, and her voice dropped low. A coded sequence poured from her lips, harsh, guttural, alien, a language Jace had never heard. The ship responded instantly, lighting up with silent pulses. Outside, the Syndicate vessel suddenly shook, its lights dying out, its systems crashing. Sariel had spoken a kill command. Something buried deep in the hardware, something only she knew. Jace stood frozen, breath caught in his chest. The black ship floated dead in space, completely silent. Sariel leaned back, exhausted, sweat on her face. She looked at him and said, "They made me to obey. I learned how to destroy." Jace stepped closer, unsure what to say. She looked fragile and strong all at once, like glass wrapped in fire. He said the only thing that came to his mind. "You saved both of us." Sariel gave him a tired smile. "No, I just gave you time. They'll send more." He looked at the stars ahead, knowing she was right. But now, he also knew something else. Sariel wasn't just a victim. She was a weapon, a witness, and maybe the only one who could tear down the system that built her. The ship was quiet again, but not peaceful. The wreckage of the Syndicate vessels still floated behind them, cold and lifeless. Jay sat in the pilot's seat, one hand pressed tightly against his side. Blood seeped between his fingers, warm and steady. A shard of metal from the attack had struck him during the evasive dive. He hadn't told Sariel yet, didn't want to slow her down, but now he couldn't hide it anymore. She noticed, of course, she always noticed. "You're bleeding," she said, stepping toward him quickly. He tried to wave her off. "It's nothing, just a cut." But his voice betrayed him, weak and cracking. She didn't argue, didn't ask permission. She knelt beside him, tore a strip of cloth from her thin robe, and pressed it firmly to the wound. Jace winced, gripping the chair. "You're stronger than you look." "I had to be," she replied. Her voice calm. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Only the ship's low hum filled the silence. Then she looked him in the eyes. "You saved me," she said. "Now let me save you." He leaned back, groaning softly as the pain took over. Sariel moved with speed and focus, finding the med kit, cleaning the wound, sealing it with a foam injector. Jace watched her through half-lidded eyes. She wasn't scared, not anymore. Her hands were steady, her mind sharp. She had been trained to serve, yes, but also to survive, and now she was using every skill she'd ever been forced to learn to protect someone who finally gave her choice. "You need rest," she said, adjusting the ship's controls to autopilot. "I'll take first watch." Jace tried to protest, but she touched his shoulder gently. "Please. Trust me." He closed his eyes and nodded, letting the pain drag him into unconsciousness. Hours passed, the stars drifting outside the glass. But Sariel didn't sleep. She sat quietly, fingers moving over the encrypted crystal she had hidden. Since the escape, lines of alien code flickered on the screen. She whispered commands into the ship's core, unlocking files, long-buried names, routes, coordinates, evidence of the trade networks, the buyers, the systems that allowed her life to be stolen. It was all there, and now she had a way to expose it. But something else caught her eye. A symbol hidden in the deepest part of the shard, one she hadn't seen since she was a child. Her family's crest, a forgotten royal seal, buried in code. Her hands trembled as she traced the lines. "I wasn't the only one they took," she whispered. "They took everything." Suddenly, a quiet ping echoed from the Systema message beacon. It wasn't from the Syndicate. It was a wideband signal. Buried in static, she filtered the feed, enhanced the audio, and listened. 2. Any surviving daughters of House Varelia? Your bloodline still lives. The resistance waits. Sariel stared at the screen, her heart pounding in her chest. For the first time since she was taken, she wasn't alone. Someone out there still remembered. Still hoped, still fought. She turned to look at Jace. Still unconscious, breathing steadily, she touched his arm, gently, just to remind herself he was real. Then she stood, her voice soft but filled with steel. "They thought they broke me," she said. But they only built a witness. A soft alarm warned her of another ship entering distant radar range. Not Syndicate, not a patrol, something else, bigger, older, armored. She stared at the screen, then smiled coldly. "If they're coming, Then let them see what they made. She powered up the shields, armed the cannons, and locked the data crystal back into place. The ship responded like it had been waiting for her. Like it belonged to her now. Jace stirred behind her, still too weak to move, but he didn't need to fight this time, because the girl he had rescued from a cage was gone. What stood at the helm now was something else entirely. Not a slave, not a number, but a weapon with a voice. And she was done being silent. The stars ahead looked colder now, not distant or silent. But watching, waiting, Sariel stood at the helm, the crystal still glowing softly beside her. Jace rested in the med pod behind her, his wound stabilized. But his body weak, he didn't know where she was taking them, but she did. The signal from the beacon had led her here to a forgotten part of space near the remains of the Varelian core. It used to be home, she thought. Now, it was just ashes, floating through gravity wells. But somewhere in the dust and silence, her people had survived. At least, some of them. As the ship approached a drifting station cloaked in old satellite wreckage, Sariel slowed her breathing. This was rebel space. No laws, no safety, no forgiveness the closer she got. The tighter the tension in her chest grew. A voice echoed over the comms, low and commanding, unregistered vessel. "State your origin and intent," Sariel answered in the old tongue. "I am Sariel, daughter of House Vikash, taken in the war, freed by fire, and returned by blood." There was silence. Then a different voice spoke, shaky, unsure. It can't be. She was a child. A rumor. Sariel pressed her palm to the console, transmitting the buried royal crest from her shard. "I was more than a rumor," she said quietly. "And I remember everything." The doors opened. The station welcomed her, but not with warmth. Blasters tracked her steps as she carried Jace's unconscious body down the ramp. The rebels were hard-faced, armored, battle-worn. They didn't bow, but they looked at her like they'd seen a ghost. From a long-dead story, one woman stepped forward, or scarred, but with the same silver-blue eyes Sariel remembered in her mother's mirror. "Lyra," she whispered, "you were my mother's sister." The woman hesitated, then nodded, her voice rough with disbelief. "We thought you were sold off-world." Gone like the others, Sariel gently laid Jace down on a padded surface. Covering him with her cloak, "I was taken," she said, "but I survived. And I didn't come back alone." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "He's human." Sariel nodded. "Yes, you brought a human into our last stronghold." "I didn't bring him," Sariel said. "He brought me. He pulled me out of chains." When no one else even tried, murmurs spread through the crowd. Some angry, some surprised. One rebel stepped forward, armor marked with command symbols. "Then prove your loyalty, princess," he said sharply. "Hand over the human, and we'll accept you back into the bloodline." Sariel went still. The weight of old blood and new pain pressed on her shoulders. She looked at Jace, still unconscious, unaware of the blades pointed at him. She remembered the first moment. He looked at her, not like a possession, not like a tool, but like a person who mattered, who deserved more. "No," she said, her voice steady. Whispers turned to shouts. "You would defy your people for one outsider?" Lyra asked, eyes burning. Sariel stepped forward, pulling the collar from her satchel, holding it up for all to see. "This was around my neck for years." She said, "None of you came for me, but he did." She threw the collar to the floor, and it clattered like a broken chain. "I'm not here to join your past," she said. "I'm here to end the future they forced on us. I have the codes, the names, the maps of the entire black chain. I can expose them all. But if you want me to betray the one person who treated me like I was more than a memory," she looked each of them in the eyes, "then I'll leave and burn the data with me." Lyra stared at her for a long time, the tension crackling in the air like lightning. Then she lowered her weapon. "No," she said, "we don't want your Fire turned against us. Keep your human, but know this, Sariel loyalty has a price. Sariel nodded slowly. I've already paid mine. They stood at the edge of a world that once closed its eyes. Now it could no longer look away. The galactic tribunal chamber was enormous. Carved from polished obsidian and lit by floating shards of light, hundreds of species sat in silence. Each in their own rows, ambassadors, warlords, queens, scholars. All gathered for one reason, to hear the testimony of a girl who was never meant to speak. Sariel walked down the central aisle with her head high, no more collar, no more cuffs. She wore a simple robe of silver gray. Her hair tied back, her steps sure and even. Beside her, Jace walked slowly, still recovering. But when she glanced at him, he gave her a nod, the kind that said, I'm with you, all the way. They reached the center of the hall, where a voice asked, Do you bring evidence? Sariel held out the crystal shard, glowing brighter than ever. I bring names, she said. Her voice calm and clear. Places, codes, owners, buyers, routes, I bring truth. The lights dimmed, and the shard projected its secrets into the air. Images flashed of cages, chains, black market deals, whispered auctions, crying children, and dead eyes. A system built on silence. Now screaming into the light, gasps spread across the chamber. Some turned their faces in shame. Others looked away in horror. And some, the guilty, the powerful, grew very still. Sariel spoke again, for years. I was called Unit 87K, a number, a thing. But I remembered every face, every room, every command. And I carved a path out of it with my mind, not with a weapon. I was bred to please. But I chose to resist. I was told I belonged to others, but now I belong to myself. And this human, she said, turning to Jace, her voice trembling slightly, he didn't free me, he just reminded me that I could free myself. The hall was silent, frozen in her truth. Then an elder from the Zavari circle stood. Why do you show us this now? He asked, because silence made it possible. She replied, and silence ends today. She walked forward, took the collar from her satchel, and placed it gently on the stone floor. This is not just mine, she said. It belongs to every voice they try to erase. Let it be a reminder, not of weakness, but of what happens when one girl decides she will never be invisible again. Behind her, Jace stepped forward. Placing his hand over hers, you wanted justice. He said quietly, for only her to hear. Now you've lit a fire across the stars. One by one, council members stood and bowed their heads. Not in pity, but in respect. The tribunal ruled in her favor. The syndicate was named an enemy. Of the accord, every world they touched was ordered to open records, reveal chains, and set the enslaved free. But for Sariel, it wasn't enough. Later, alone with Jace aboard their ship, she looked out at the stars and whispered, I don't want to be a princess, or a witness, or a symbol. I want a home. Jace turned to her, his voice soft. Then let's build one, together. She smiled real, full, and alive. For the first time, she wasn't looking behind her. Not at cages, not at scars, only forward. Toward something no one had ever given her before, a future she chose with her own hands.